Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, you're not just listening to history, you're stepping into the quiet forces that once held entire worlds together. Tonight, we'll follow a sacred flame that Rome believed could never be allowed to die. Wander into medieval fields where games were played to keep violence at bay. Stand in the silent room where Alexander the Great took his final breath. And finally, travel to the forgotten mountains where women without crowns or armies preserved memory through ritual alone. This is not a story about kings and battles. It's a story about why humans have always needed ritual, rhythm, and belief to feel safe enough to rest. So before you get comfortable, take a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if these deep sleep history stories help you find peace, sleep better, or simply reflect on our shared journey through time. Now, close your eyes, let the noise of the day fall away, slow your breathing, and allow history to soften into a calm, steady rhythm as we begin a quiet journey through the hidden structures that once kept the world from falling apart. In ancient Rome, there was a flame that was never allowed to go out. It burned quietly inside the temple of Vesta, not because it provided light, and not because it offered warmth, but because the Romans believed that as long as this flame lived, their city would endure. If it were ever to fade, even for a moment, it would not simply mean neglect or error. It would mean that something far deeper had broken. The balance between the human world and the unseen forces that protected it would be lost. This belief shaped Rome more profoundly than any wall or army ever could. And the guardians of this flame were not soldiers, politicians, or kings. They were women. Young women, chosen before they understood what the choice would mean. They were called the Vestal Virgins, and their task was not to rule, not to fight, and not even to preach. Their job was to keep the invisible order of Rome intact. To understand who the Vestal Virgins were, it helps to imagine Rome not as an empire of stone and conquest, but as a living body. Every body needs a heart, something steady and rhythmic, something that continues quietly while everything else moves and changes. For Rome, the Vestals were that heart. They represented continuity in a world defined by uncertainty. War could come, leaders could fall, laws could change, but as long as the sacred fire burned, Romans believed the city itself was safe. The Vestals were selected as children, usually between the ages of 6 and 10, taken from their families and brought into the service of the goddess Vesta. This was not seen as a loss, but as an honor. To give a daughter to the Vestals was to bind one's family to the fate of Rome itself. From that moment on, the girl no longer belonged to a household or a lineage. She belonged to the state. Her life became public, symbolic, and deeply ritualized. The most important aspect of her role was not prayer in the modern sense, it was discipline. The Vestals rose before dawn, purified themselves, and tended the sacred fire with extreme care. Every action followed tradition, every movement was deliberate. In a society that believed the gods responded to precision, the Vestals' attention to detail was a form of protection. Their work created the sense that someone, somewhere, was always maintaining order. The vow of chastity that defined the Vestals' lives is often misunderstood. It was not primarily about morality or shame. For the Romans, it was about focus and separation. By removing the Vestals from marriage, desire, and family obligation, Rome turned their bodies into neutral ground. They were not mothers of children, they were guardians of the city. Their purity symbolized a body untouched by private interests, fully dedicated to the collective. In this way, the Vestals themselves became living symbols. Their bodies represented stability. Their silence represented control. Their presence reassured the population that Rome's foundations were still intact. This is why the Vestals were granted extraordinary privileges. Unlike most Roman women, they could own property, make wills, and move freely without male guardians. They sat in places of honor at public events. Their testimony carried immense weight. Even a condemned criminal could be spared if he encountered a Vestal on his way to execution. These privileges were not gifts, they were acknowledgments of responsibility. The Vestals carried the psychological weight of the empire. When things went well, they were praised. When disaster struck, suspicion fell upon them. If famine came, if enemies advanced, if strange signs appeared in the sky, Romans wondered whether the rituals had been performed correctly, whether the sacred fire had been tended with enough care, whether the invisible order had been disturbed. In this way, the Vestals functioned as a kind of spiritual insurance system. They did not stop events from happening, they gave meaning to events after they occurred. They provided a framework through which fear could be understood and contained. Rome did not trust chance, it trusted ritual. And through the Vestal Virgins, ritual became something human, embodied, and constantly present. As night settles and your thoughts begin to slow, imagine that quiet flame burning steadily, hour after hour, year after year. No speeches, no battles, just continuity. An empire placing its faith not in noise or force, but in the disciplined silence of those who watched over its most fragile symbol. This was the true job of the Vestal Virgins, to keep Rome whole by keeping belief alive. As the sacred fire continued to burn day after day, another element of the Vestal Virgins' role worked quietly beneath the surface of Roman life. It was not visible like flame, nor audible like prayer. It existed in the realm of expectation, the vow. When a Vestal Virgin took her oath of chastity, Rome understood it not as a private promise, but as a public structure. This vow was woven into the city's sense of safety. It was a stabilizing force, something the Romans believed held chaos at bay. To them, desire was not dangerous because it was immoral, but because it was unpredictable. Desire led to divided loyalties, to family obligations that competed with civic duty, to personal futures that could drift away from the collective. By removing the Vestals from these currents, Rome created a human anchor, a group of women whose lives followed a single, unwavering direction. Their bodies became symbols of control in a world that felt constantly at risk of losing it. This is why the Vestals were selected so young. Childhood, in Roman thinking, was a moment before division, before marriage, before ambition, before attachment. By choosing girls at the edge of awareness, the state shaped not only their future, but the meaning of the vow itself. It was not something renegotiated each day. It was something absorbed, lived, and eventually embodied. Over time, the Vestal did not simply keep her vow, she became it, and Rome watched closely. The Vestals lived under a gaze that was both reverent and anxious. When harvests were good and borders were secure, they were praised as symbols of divine favor. But when uncertainty entered the city, attention shifted. A military defeat, a strange eclipse, a disease moving silently through the streets. In moments like these, Romans searched for causes beyond strategy or medicine. They looked for imbalance, And imbalance, in their minds, often meant ritual failure. Had a ceremony been performed incorrectly? Had the sacred fire faltered? Had one of the Vestals allowed her discipline to slip? These questions did not come from cruelty alone, they came from fear. The Vestals were the point where anxiety could be focused. By concentrating fear on a known group, society could avoid confronting the idea that disaster might be random. Rome did not fear danger as much as it feared meaninglessness. The vow gave disaster a narrative. This is why the punishment for breaking it was so severe and so carefully constructed. A Vestal could not be executed like an ordinary criminal. Her body was consecrated. To spill her blood would pollute the very order Rome sought to preserve. Instead, the state chose burial alive, an underground chamber prepared with ritual precision, a small supply of food, a door sealed behind her. Officially, the city did not kill a Vestal, it withdrew from her. The symbolism was unmistakable. A body that once protected the city was now removed to save it. These events were rare, but their rarity made them more powerful. They reminded every Vestal and every citizen that order depended on restraint, and restraint demanded sacrifice. And yet, the story does not end with fear alone. Within this rigid system, the Vestals developed a unique authority. They moved through Rome untouched by ordinary hierarchies. Their presence could stop violence. Their words could influence legal outcomes. They represented a form of power that did not command, but steadied. In a city built on competition and ambition, the Vestals stood apart. They did not advance, they endured. Over decades of service, the Vestal learned the rhythms of Rome more intimately than most senators or generals ever could. She watched generations pass. She saw leaders rise and fall. Through it all, her task remained unchanged. Maintain the fire, maintain the vow, maintain the sense that something in the city was constant. This is what made the Vestals so effective as guardians of order. They did not promise happiness or victory, they promised continuity. As the night deepens and the world grows quieter, it becomes easier to understand why Rome trusted this system for so long. In times of uncertainty, people seek patterns that feel older and stronger than themselves. The Vestal Virgins offered exactly that, a disciplined stillness at the center of a restless empire. A reminder that as long as some things were held firmly and without question, the city could keep moving forward, one steady breath at a time. To live as a Vestal Virgin was to inhabit a space unlike any other in ancient Rome. While most women were defined by family, marriage, and domestic duty, the Vestals existed outside those boundaries. Their daily lives unfolded within the Temple of Vesta and its surrounding complex, a place that felt both sheltered and exposed. Sheltered because they were protected by law and tradition, exposed because every movement carried symbolic weight. The Vestals were never truly unseen. Even in silence, they were watched. Yet it was precisely this visibility that granted them an unusual form of freedom. Free from husbands, free from paternal authority, free from the expectations that governed most Roman women, the Vestals moved through the city as living institutions rather than private individuals. Their presence alone conveyed meaning. This is why silence mattered so much in their world. Silence was not emptiness, it was authority held in reserve. The Vestals did not need to speak often because their role had already been defined by centuries of belief. When a Vestal appeared in public, crowds parted. Not because she demanded space, but because custom created it. Her quiet movement through Rome reminded people that something older and steadier than politics still existed. In the courts, a Vestal's word could tip the balance of a case. In public ceremonies, her attendance legitimized the ritual. Even the accidental meeting between a Vestal and a condemned man was believed to carry divine meaning. These moments reinforce the idea that the Vestals were intermediaries between the visible city and an invisible order that governed it. Their privileges were tangible. They owned property. They managed wealth. They made wills without male guardians. They traveled under protection. Yet these privileges were not indulgences. They were tools that allowed the Vestals to function independently, untouched by competing loyalties. Rome did not grant them freedom out of generosity. It granted freedom to preserve focus. The Vestals' daily routines reflected this balance between privilege and restraint. Their mornings began early, with purification rituals that prepared both body and mind. The tending of the sacred fire was slow, methodical, and continuous. There was no rush, no urgency, only attention. Through repetition, time itself seemed to soften within the temple walls. The Vestals learned to measure life not in events, but in cycles. Flame tended, ash cleared, silence maintained. In this rhythm, they became anchors not only for the city, but for themselves. Over time, many Vestals developed a presence that Roman writers described with quiet awe. They were calm in crisis, measured in speech, unmoved by spectacle. Their power did not come from charisma or command, it came from reliability. In a society shaped by ambition and competition, the Vestals embodied the opposite. They did not rise, they remained. And remaining, year after year, gave them a perspective few others possessed. They saw political dramas unfold and fade. They witnessed triumphs celebrated and forgotten. Through it all, their task endured unchanged. This endurance shaped how Romans thought about stability itself. Order, they believed, was not something achieved once and defended forever. It was something practiced daily. The Vestals modeled this belief through their lives. They did not intervene loudly when chaos threatened. They continued their rituals. And in doing so, they reassured the city that not everything was unraveling. This quiet reassurance was perhaps their greatest contribution. When people feel surrounded by uncertainty, they look for signs of continuity. The Vestals offered exactly that. Not answers, not solutions, but presence. As the centuries passed, Rome changed dramatically. Power shifted, institutions rose and fell. Yet the image of the Vestal tending the flame remained remarkably consistent. It became a memory Rome carried even as it evolved. And in that memory, silence was not absence, it was structure. As night deepens and the world around you slows, imagine stepping into that temple space, the sound of the city fading, the steady glow of fire, the calm assurance that someone, somewhere, is still doing what must be done, simply because it has always been done. This is the privilege of silence, and this is why the Vestal Virgins mattered so deeply to Rome.
There were moments in Rome's long history when confidence wavered and certainty thinned, when even the most disciplined rituals could not quiet a growing unease. In those moments, fear did not scatter randomly through the city. It gathered, and it gathered around symbols. Storms that destroyed crops, defeats on distant frontiers, strange movements in the sky, animals behaving out of character, whispers of disease drifting through crowded streets. These were not seen as isolated events. To the Roman mind, they were signals, messages from a world that could not speak directly, but could be read if one knew where to look. And when signs appeared, Rome turned its gaze inward, toward those who stood closest to the boundary between human order and divine will. The Vestal Virgins stood at that boundary. They had been placed there deliberately. Their lives were designed to absorb meaning, to carry significance on behalf of everyone else. When something went wrong, It felt natural, even necessary, to ask whether the invisible foundations of the city had cracked. Had the fire flickered? Had a ritual been rushed? Had discipline failed in some small, unseen way? These questions were not accusations at first. They were attempts to regain control. Fear seeks explanation before it seeks blame. In public assemblies and private conversations, Romans tried to restore balance by reviewing rites, repeating ceremonies, and consulting priests. The Vestals, with their calm routines and unwavering presence, became a stabilizing reference point. If they were still performing their duties correctly, then perhaps the world had not completely slipped out of alignment. Yet the same logic that offered comfort could also turn harsh. If disasters continued, reassurance began to feel insufficient. Anxiety hardened into suspicion. In such times, the Vestals' symbolic role intensified. Their purity was no longer just a sign of order, it became a test. The city's collective fear narrowed its focus, asking whether the human vessels entrusted with Rome's safety had remained flawless. This dynamic reveals something deeply human about Roman religion. It was not built on blind faith alone. It was built on accountability. Someone had to be responsible for maintaining balance, and responsibility in Rome always carried weight. The Vestals were revered because they accepted this weight. They lived knowing that their discipline was not only personal, but public. Their silence did not shield them from scrutiny, it invited it. Historical records describe rare but dramatic moments when a Vestal was accused of breaking her vow following a series of misfortunes. These trials were not spectacles of outrage. They were somber, ritualized responses to fear. Rome did not rush to condemn. It deliberated. It sought signs, testimony, and confirmation. Even then, the process was less about the individual than about restoring confidence. The burial alive of a Vestal was not meant to satisfy anger. It was meant to close a breach, to signal that order had been repaired, that the city had responded appropriately to divine displeasure. For the Vestals who remained, these moments reinforced the gravity of their role. They were not merely caretakers of a flame, they were caretakers of meaning. In times of crisis, they became mirrors reflecting the city's inner state, calm when Rome was calm, tense when Rome trembled. And through it all, their daily routines continued. Fires were tended, rituals repeated, silence maintained. This persistence was not denial, it was strategy. By continuing familiar actions, the Vestals offered the city something to hold on to, a sense that not everything was spiraling beyond control. In modern terms, we might call this psychological containment. The Vestals absorbed fear so that it would not spread unchecked. Their presence allowed anxiety to settle into ritual rather than erupt into chaos. As night deepens and thoughts slow, it becomes easier to see why such a system endured. Human beings have always struggled with uncertainty. When events feel random and overwhelming, we look for patterns that reassure us. Rome found those patterns in ritual and in the people entrusted to perform it flawlessly. The Vestal Virgins were not asked to prevent disaster. They were asked to give disaster a shape, a place, and an ending. In doing so, they helped Rome sleep at night, believing that someone was still watching the fire, still holding the line between order and collapse.
For centuries, the system of the Vestal Virgins endured with remarkable consistency. Empires expanded and contracted. Laws were rewritten. New gods entered Rome, and old ones were reinterpreted. Yet the image of the Vestal tending the sacred fire remained almost unchanged.
This continuity itself became part of Rome's identity. But no system built on belief, however powerful, is immune to time. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the conditions that sustained the Vestals began to shift. Rome grew larger, more complex, and more distant from its early foundations. Political power moved away from ritual and toward administration. Faith did not disappear, but it fragmented. New religious ideas offered different ways of understanding order, salvation, and meaning. In this changing landscape, the quiet certainty that once surrounded the Vestals began to soften. Their role did not vanish overnight. It thinned. As Christianity spread through the Roman world, the logic that had supported the Vestals lost its central position. The sacred fire, once believed to guarantee the city's survival, came to be seen as a relic of an older worldview. By the late 4th century, imperial support for traditional Roman cults faded. In the year 394 CE, the fire of Vesta was extinguished for the last time. There was no recorded panic, no collapse, no immediate catastrophe. Rome did not fall in that moment. Instead, something subtler occurred. A long chapter quietly closed. This ending is important because it reveals something essential about the Vestals' true function. They were never magical in themselves. Their power came from collective belief. When the belief changed, the system no longer held. And yet, the absence of chaos at the moment the fire went out does not mean the Vestals were irrelevant. It means they had already done their work. For centuries, they provided Rome with a way to think about stability. They offered a shared focus for fear, hope, and responsibility. They gave the city a ritual rhythm that allowed people to live with uncertainty. By the time their flame was extinguished, Rome had learned new ways to organize meaning. The Vestals faded because they were no longer needed in the same way. This invites a deeper reflection, especially as the world grows quiet around you. The story of the Vestal Virgins is not ultimately about control or repression. It is about how societies create calm in the face of uncertainty. Rome placed its trust in repetition, discipline, and visible symbols of continuity. The Vestals embodied those values with their lives. They accepted a role that required immense restraint so that millions of others could feel secure. Their silence carried the weight of an empire not because it was enforced, but because it was believed in. Even after their disappearance, the image of the Vestal remained powerful. Roman writers, medieval scholars, and modern historians continued to return to them, sensing that something fundamental about human order was preserved in their story. We still ask why societies need rituals, why symbols matter, why quiet, consistent actions can feel more reassuring than dramatic displays of strength. The Vestals answer these questions without speaking. They remind us that stability is often maintained not by those who shout the loudest, but by those who keep showing up, day after day, performing the same careful acts. As you drift toward sleep, imagine that final moment not as an ending filled with loss, but as a gentle transition. The fire dimming, the temple growing still, the city already moving on, carrying with it the memory of centuries spent believing that someone was always there, watching the flame. This memory, more than the fire itself, is the Vestal's lasting legacy. It whispers a quiet truth that remains relevant even now, that human beings across time seek reassurance not only in power, but in continuity, not only in change, but in things that endure long enough to let the mind rest.
After the church bells faded into silence,
Medieval life did not simply return to labor or prayer. Something else followed, something just as structured, just as meaningful, yet far less solemn. People gathered in open fields, village squares, and along dusty roads not to fight wars, but to play. To the modern eye, these scenes can look chaotic or even violent. Men wrestling in the mud, horses charging toward one another, arrows flying at distant targets, crowds shouting, laughing, and pressing close. But beneath the noise and motion was an unspoken understanding. These games were not accidents, they were rituals. In a world where violence was always close at hand, play became a way to contain it. Medieval society was shaped by scarcity, rigid hierarchy, and constant tension. Land disputes, feudal obligations, religious conflict, and the ever-present threat of war created pressure that could not simply be ignored. People needed release, but release without structure was dangerous. Unchecked aggression could tear communities apart. This is where games and sport entered daily life. They offered a controlled outlet, a space where strength could be tested, rivalry expressed, and emotion released without permanently damaging the social fabric. Wrestling matches, for example, were not random brawls. They followed local customs and expectations. There were agreed boundaries, recognized techniques, and communal oversight. To step outside these norms was to invite punishment or shame. In this way, physical confrontation was transformed into performance. The body moved violently, but within limits everyone understood. Tournaments and jousts served a similar function on a grander scale. Knights trained for war, but they displayed their skill in highly regulated contests. Armor was worn, rules were enforced, honor mattered as much as victory. These events reminded participants and spectators alike that even violence could be shaped by order. Archery contests, common in many regions, blended utility with ritual. Archers honed skills essential for defense, yet competitions turned practice into play. The target stood still, the crowd watched. Success was measured not by death, but by precision. Even village festivals followed this logic. Feast days were filled with games, races, mock battles, and tests of endurance. These celebrations were carefully timed. They happened after harvests, on holy days, or during seasonal transitions. The calendar itself imposed limits. Play was allowed, even encouraged, but only at certain times. This rhythm mattered. It reassured communities that disorder had its place, and that place was temporary. The idea that play could prevent violence may seem counterintuitive, but medieval people understood something fundamental about human nature. When energy is suppressed entirely, it does not disappear, it accumulates. When given no outlet, frustration seeks destructive paths. Games offered a release valve. They transformed potential conflict into shared experience. People competed, but they did so under the gaze of neighbors, priests, and local authorities. This visibility turned aggression into spectacle rather than threat. Sport became a mirror of society, reflecting its tensions in a form that could be safely contained. As night approaches and your thoughts begin to slow, imagine one of these medieval scenes. The sun lowering over a village green, the sound of laughter mixing with shouts, muscles straining, then relaxing, the contest ending not in bloodshed, but in shared exhaustion. These moments mattered. They kept communities intact. They reminded people that even in a harsh world, not every clash needed to become a war. Sometimes it could simply become a game.
In the Middle Ages, time itself was not neutral. It was structured, layered, and deeply symbolic. Days were not all the same, and neither were behaviors allowed within them. The medieval calendar divided life into moments of restraint and moments of release.
and nowhere was this more visible than in the rhythm of feast days and holy celebrations. After weeks of labor and discipline, the church calendar opened windows where ordinary rules softened. These were not accidents or lapses in control, they were deliberate pauses built into the social order. On feast days, villages transformed. Work slowed or stopped entirely. Markets expanded. Music filled the air. Games appeared where silence had ruled. Races, mock combats, ball games, and contests of strength unfolded under banners and bells. To an outsider, it might have looked like disorder, but to medieval communities, it was a necessary balancing act. By allowing chaos at specific times, society prevented it from erupting at the wrong ones. This idea was widely understood, even if it was rarely written down. Human energy needed space. Joy, frustration, rivalry, and desire all demanded expression. If denied completely, they would seek darker outlets. Feast days gave these forces a stage. They were moments when laughter could grow loud, bodies could move freely, and competition could be celebrated without threatening the underlying hierarchy. Importantly, these days were bounded. They began and ended. Bells signaled their opening and their close. The return to work afterward was not experienced as punishment, but as restoration. The structure remained intact because it had bent without breaking. Games played during these festivals followed recognizable forms. There were rules, even when they were loose. There were referees, even if informal. Elders, clergy, and local leaders watched, not to suppress joy, but to keep it from tipping into harm. Violence was permitted only in symbolic ways. Mock battles used blunted weapons. Physical contests ended before serious injury. The goal was exhaustion, not destruction. In this way, medieval play acted as a rehearsal for restraint. Participants learned how far they could push and when to stop. This learning mattered. It shaped how conflicts were handled outside festival time. People who had tested themselves publicly and been seen doing so were less likely to settle disputes privately through unchecked violence. The communal nature of play reinforced this effect. Games were rarely solitary, they happened in crowds, under shared expectations. Victory was acknowledged, but so was participation. Shame followed those who cheated or broke custom. Honor came not just from winning, but from playing correctly. These values mirrored those of warfare and law, but without their final consequences. Children absorbed these lessons early. Watching adults compete, laugh, lose, and accept outcomes taught them how emotion could be expressed safely. In this way, play became education. It taught patience, timing, and respect for limits. The medieval church, often portrayed as hostile to physical enjoyment, understood this dynamic better than it is sometimes credited for. While condemning excess, it tolerated and even organized many festivals because they served a stabilizing function. Religious processions blended solemnity with spectacle. Saints' days mixed prayer with play. The sacred and the playful were not opposites, they were partners. One restrained, the other released. Together, they created a rhythm that people could live within. As evening falls and your breathing slows, imagine a medieval feast day coming to its close. The games end, the crowd disperses, laughter fades into quiet conversation. Muscles ache pleasantly. The familiar order returns, intact and accepted. Nothing has been lost, much has been released. This is how medieval society stayed whole, not by denying human nature, but by giving it a place, a time, and a boundary. Among the most striking images of the Middle Ages are those of armored knights facing one another in open fields, lances lowered, banners fluttering in the wind. To modern viewers, jousts and tournaments can appear like simple spectacles or rehearsals for war. Yet to medieval society, they were something far more deliberate. They were a carefully constructed answer to a dangerous problem. How does a culture built on warfare prevent its warriors from turning that violence inward? The solution was not to eliminate aggression, but to discipline it. Tournaments transformed the chaos of battle into ritual. Knights trained for war, but they proved themselves in public contests governed by rules, witnesses, and expectations. The joust in particular was not a random collision. It followed strict conventions. Weapons were standardized. Armor was regulated. Victory was defined not by killing, but by unhorsing, skill, or endurance. These limits mattered deeply. They taught combatants that force could exist without annihilation. Honor replaced slaughter as the primary measure of success. This shift had social consequences. Knights who competed in tournaments learned to perform aggression in a way that reaffirmed hierarchy rather than threatening it. Reputation was earned publicly and could be lost just as publicly. Cheating, cruelty, or uncontrolled rage brought shame, not glory. In this way, tournaments acted as moral theaters. They staged violence so that it could be judged. The crowd played a crucial role. Spectators were not passive. Their approval, silence, or disapproval reinforced standards of conduct. A knight who fought well but dishonorably gained little. One who showed restraint under pressure earned respect. This dynamic extended beyond the lists. It shaped expectations on actual battlefields and in daily interactions among the nobility. The ritualization of violence taught warriors when to stop. That lesson was essential in a world where feuds could spiral endlessly. By giving conflict a formal outlet, medieval society reduced the likelihood of private vendettas. Tournaments provided a place to settle rivalries symbolically rather than destructively. The language of honor replaced the language of revenge. Even the pageantry surrounding these events reinforced order. Music, heraldry, and ceremony framed the contest, reminding participants that they were part of something larger than themselves. The ritual did not deny violence, it contained it. As evening approaches and your thoughts slow, imagine a tournament drawing to a close. Dust settles, armor is removed, the crowd disperses. What remains is not chaos, but relief. The energy that might have fueled hatred has been spent within agreed boundaries. This was not entertainment alone, it was social engineering. By turning war into play, medieval culture preserved itself. Violence, when given form, ceased to be purely destructive. It became a tool for maintaining peace within a world that could never fully escape conflict.
Beyond tournaments and grand festivals, the daily life of medieval play unfolded in smaller, quieter forms. These were the village games, the spontaneous contests that appeared at the edges of workdays and along familiar paths. Children chased one another through fields. Adults tested strength with stones, sticks, or simple races. Balls made of leather or cloth were kicked, thrown, and argued over. None of this required official sanction, yet none of it was truly free. Invisible rules governed these moments as surely as written laws governed courts. Everyone knew when play had gone too far. Everyone knew when laughter was about to turn into harm. And when that line was crossed, the crowd responded. This is where medieval society revealed one of its most effective mechanisms of stability. Control did not always come from above. Often, it emerged from within. Games created temporary spaces where hierarchy softened, but it never vanished entirely. Elders watched, neighbors intervened, reputation mattered. To behave badly in play was to risk one's standing in daily life. the same people you played with were the people you depended on for survival. This interdependence shaped behavior more powerfully than punishment alone ever could. Informal games taught lessons that no sermon could fully convey. They showed how strength should be displayed without cruelty, how competition could exist without permanent division, how anger could be released and then set aside. The crowd served as both audience and judge. Approval came in cheers and laughter. Disapproval came in silence, ridicule, or exclusion. These responses were immediate and memorable. Over time, they shaped instinct. People learned to regulate themselves before others needed to step in. This self-regulation was essential in a world with limited centralized authority. Medieval communities could not rely on constant enforcement. They relied on shared expectations. Play reinforced those expectations repeatedly. It allowed people to practice conflict resolution in miniature. A disagreement during a game could be settled on the spot, observed by many, and then forgotten. The same dispute, if carried into private life, might have lingered and grown dangerous. By offering a public outlet, games prevented small tensions from becoming lasting feuds. Even rough games had purpose. They tested boundaries. They taught resilience. They reminded participants of their own limits. Injuries were not celebrated, but endurance was respected. To play and return to work the next day was a sign of balance restored. The cycle mattered. Work built pressure, play released it. Community watched over both. As night approaches and your breathing slows, imagine a village square growing quiet. The game has ended. The crowd disperses. No records are kept, yet lessons remain. This is how order sustained itself, not through constant command, but through shared understanding, repeated again and again in moments of play.
When we look back across the Middle Ages, it becomes clear that games and sport were never distractions from real life. They were part of its architecture. Medieval society did not separate work, belief, and play into unrelated compartments. Instead, these elements formed a single rhythm, repeating week after week, season after season. Work tightened the structure. Belief gave it meaning. Play softened the edges. This balance allowed communities to endure conditions that were often harsh and uncertain. Games functioned as what we might call a simulated order. Within them, people practiced conflict, hierarchy, and cooperation in a space where the consequences were limited and reversible. Nothing essential was permanently lost. Pride could be bruised and then restored. Strength could be tested and then set aside. In this sense, play became rehearsal for life itself. Medieval people understood something that modern societies often forget. Order cannot be sustained by pressure alone. A system that only demands obedience eventually fractures. The Middle Ages responded to this reality not with constant control, but with rhythm. There were times to restrain the body and times to let it move, times to be silent and times to shout, times to bow and times to compete. Games gave permission to experience intensity without letting intensity take over. This is why rules mattered so deeply, even in play. The presence of limits did not diminish enjoyment. It made enjoyment safe. Boundaries turned chaos into something temporary and contained. When the game ended, order returned naturally because it had never fully left. The community had watched the entire process unfold. Everyone knew where the line had been drawn. This shared knowledge was the foundation of trust. Over time, the memory of these cycles settled into the collective mind. People learned almost instinctively that release would come, that frustration did not need to explode, that there would be a day when the bell would ring, the field would fill, and energy could move again. This expectation alone reduced violence. Patience grew where despair might otherwise have taken root. The lesson is subtle but profound. Medieval games did not eliminate conflict, they acknowledged it. They gave it form. They allowed society to breathe. In the quiet after a festival or contest, there was a sense of completion. Something had been expressed and resolved. The body tired, the mind settled. Sleep came more easily. This is perhaps the most enduring legacy of medieval play. It shows us that rest is not always found in stillness. Sometimes it is found in motion that ends at the right time. As you listen and your thoughts slow, consider how this ancient rhythm still echoes today. Modern life often removes boundaries from play while tightening them around work. The result is restlessness without release. The medieval world, for all its hardship, knew how to place limits in both directions. Play was intense, but it ended. Work was demanding, but it paused. This balance protected the social body. In the Middle Ages, people did not play because life was easy. They played because life was difficult. Games were not luxuries, they were necessities. They prevented pressure from turning inward and destroying what held communities together. As night deepens and your thoughts slow closer to sleep, imagine the final moments of a medieval day. The field empty, the tools put away, the laughter already becoming memory. Order remains, not because it is enforced, but because it has been renewed. This is the quiet wisdom hidden in medieval games. When people are allowed to play within limits, they are less likely to break the world around them. And so the society rests, not in silence alone, but in the knowledge that release and restraint will return in their proper time.
So, Alexander did not die in the clash of shields or beneath a rain of arrows. He did not fall from his horse in battle, nor was he struck down by an enemy's hand. He died quietly, far from the roar of war, in a room heavy with heat and waiting. In Babylon, in the year 323 BCE, the man who had crossed continents and bent kingdoms into a single shape lay still. Around him, generals, courtiers, and soldiers moved softly, as if loud sounds might fracture something already fragile. The silence of his death mattered. It marked a moment unlike any other in ancient history. When Alexander lived, his presence functioned as a center of gravity. His authority was not only military, it was symbolic. He was the figure through which meaning flowed. Conquest was justified because he stood at its heart. Loyalty made sense because it pointed toward him. Even disagreement found its reference point in his will. The empire did not exist merely because territory had been taken. It existed because people believed in the continuity embodied by Alexander himself. This belief did not require written constitutions or stable institutions. It required a living symbol. As long as Alexander breathed, the world he had assembled held together, even when stretched thin. When he stopped breathing, something far more subtle than power vanished. The center dissolved. In the days following his death, confusion did not explode immediately into violence. Instead, it hovered. Questions circulated quietly. Who would lead? Who had the right? Who could speak in Alexander's name? There was no clear answer, and this absence mattered more than any single decision. Alexander had never named a successor in a way that could outlive him. His empire was unified by his presence, not by a system. When that presence vanished, the unity lost its anchor. His generals, the men who had conquered alongside him, did not rush to crown a new king. Instead, they hesitated.
Each understood that no one among them could replace Alexander in the way that mattered most. They could command armies, they could govern regions, but they could not embody the shared belief that had held the empire together. What followed was not an immediate collapse, but a slow unraveling. Authority fragmented because meaning fragmented first. Without a single figure to orient loyalty, every claim to power became partial. Every command required justification that no longer carried universal weight. This is why the death of Alexander feels less like an ending and more like the extinguishing of a flame. As with a sacred fire, the danger was not in the darkness that followed immediately, but in the loss of a point around which everything had once been arranged. The empire did not fall because it was weak, it fell because it no longer knew what it was pointing toward. As night deepens and your thoughts slow, imagine that quiet room in Babylon, the conqueror still, the world holding its breath. This was not the sound of defeat, it was the sound of orientation disappearing. And once orientation is gone, even the strongest structures begin to drift.
In the days that followed Alexander's death, the empire did not immediately fracture. Armies did not mutiny. Cities did not revolt all at once. Instead, time seemed to slow. Decisions were postponed. Voices softened. The great machine of conquest paused, unsure which direction it was meant to move. This pause is one of the most revealing moments in the story. It shows that power alone was never enough. What truly mattered was legitimacy, and legitimacy had always flowed through Alexander's living presence. Without him, authority hovered in the air, unattached. His generals gathered, men who had marched thousands of miles together and shared victory after victory. Each possessed strength, each commanded loyalty, yet none could step forward without hesitation. To claim leadership was not simply to seize control, it was to claim the right to define the empire's future. And no one knew what words could replace Alexander's name. The famous moment when Alexander asked to whom he left his empire is said to have answered, "To the strongest," captures this uncertainty perfectly. Whether the phrase was spoken or not matters less than the truth it reflects. Strength without shared belief creates competition, not order. The generals understood this instinctively. To move too quickly was to risk tearing apart what still existed. So they waited. They negotiated. They argued quietly. They searched for a center that no longer existed. In the meantime, Alexander's body became a symbol in its own right. Where it would be buried, who would escort it, and which city would claim it were not logistical questions. They were struggles over meaning. To control the body was to inherit a fragment of the authority that had vanished. This reveals how deeply symbolic Alexander's rule had been. Even in death, he remained the reference point. Yet, symbols cannot govern alone. As weeks turned into months, provisional arrangements replaced certainty. Regents were named, territories were divided. Titles were assigned carefully as if language itself might stabilize what belief no longer could. But these measures only delayed the inevitable. Without a shared center, loyalty began to follow proximity rather than principle. Soldiers trusted the commanders they could see. Cities aligned with rulers who could protect them immediately. The empire, once unified by a single story, became a collection of smaller narratives. Each claimed continuity, but none could command the whole. This gradual shift is important. It reminds us that empires do not always fall in dramatic collapse. Sometimes they dissolve through administrative calm. Paper replaces presence. Agreements replace faith. The world continues to function, but something essential is missing. The death of Alexander did not remove power from the world. It redistributed it without restoring meaning. As night settles and your breathing deepens, imagine those early days after his passing. Tents lit softly, councils meeting behind closed doors. No shouts, no crowns raised, only the quiet realization that the flame that once oriented everything was gone, and no one yet knew how to relight it.
As months passed after Alexander's death, the empire entered a phase that looked orderly on the surface, but hollow beneath. Agreements were drafted, territories assigned, and titles distributed with careful precision. To observers, it might have appeared that continuity had been preserved, yet something essential was missing. The men who now ruled were powerful, but they were not successors in the way Alexander had been a ruler. They governed land, not meaning. Each general claimed legitimacy through proximity, through shared campaigns, shared memories, shared scars. But proximity is not the same as center. Without a single focal point, authority began to overlap and contradict itself. This is why historians speak of the Diadochi, the successors, not as inheritors of an empire, but as fragments of it. Each held a piece of Alexander's legacy, yet none could hold the whole. Their conflicts were not merely about borders. They were arguments about what Alexander's empire was supposed to be. Macedonian kingdom, universal monarchy, personal conquest frozen in time. Every interpretation pulled the structure in a different direction. The result was a slow, grinding erosion of unity. What had once been one story became many competing versions. Soldiers felt this change first. Loyalty shifted from idea to individual. Men followed generals they knew, trusted, and depended upon for survival. The abstract notion of a single empire faded in importance. Cities felt it too. Once oriented toward a distant but powerful center, they now negotiated with nearby rulers who could offer immediate protection. Practical needs replaced shared belief. This transition did not require dramatic rebellion. It happened quietly, through everyday choices. Administrators adjusted. Taxes flowed to new capitals. Armies marched under different banners. The map still bore Alexander's imprint, but the meaning behind it had thinned. In this sense, the empire did not shatter, it dissolved. Like a shape traced in water, it blurred until only outlines remained. The successors continued to invoke Alexander's name, minting coins with his image, staging ceremonies that echoed his reign. But repetition without conviction has limits. Symbols require belief to function. Without it, they become decoration. Over time, even the rituals lost their power to bind. Conflict among the Diadochi intensified, not because ambition suddenly increased, but because nothing stood above ambition anymore. There was no shared horizon. Each victory narrowed rather than expanded unity. Each defeat deepened fragmentation. This is the quiet tragedy of Alexander's death. He built an empire around himself so successfully that it could not exist without him. His strength lay in unifying meaning, but that same concentration ensured fragility. When the center vanished, the structure had nowhere to transfer its weight. As night deepens and your thoughts slow, imagine the empire at this stage. Roads still used,
cities still bustling, orders still given and obeyed. Yet beneath the motion, a sense of drift, everyone moving, no one truly leading the whole. This is how great powers often end, not with collapse, but with dispersal. Meaning goes first, territory follows later.
As the years unfolded after Alexander's death, conflict returned to the empire, but it returned in a different form. These were not wars of expansion guided by a shared horizon. They were wars of positioning, fought to secure fragments rather than to build something whole. Armies marched, cities changed hands, and alliances shifted repeatedly. On the surface, history seemed to resume its familiar rhythm. Beneath it, however, something had changed permanently. Victory no longer restored order, it merely rearranged uncertainty. Each battle answered a question only to raise several more. Who would rule here now? For how long? And by what right? Without a central figure to give meaning to conquest, warfare lost its integrative power. It exhausted rather than unified. Soldiers felt this shift deeply. Under Alexander, campaigns carried a sense of direction. Each march pointed forward. Each hardship was justified by a promise of shared purpose. Now, the same hardships repeated without a clear end. Men fought bravely, but not with the same conviction. Loyalty remained, but it narrowed. It attached to pay, to survival, to familiar commanders. The idea of fighting for a world-changing vision faded into memory. Cities, too, grew weary. Once proud of their place within a vast empire, they now faced constant renegotiation. Each new ruler demanded allegiance, taxes, and reassurance. Stability became temporary. Trust became cautious. People adapted, but adaptation carries a cost. Over time, the sense of belonging to something larger eroded. The wars of the Diadochi were not uniquely brutal by ancient standards, but they were uniquely draining. They lacked closure. No final victory could restore what had been lost, because what was lost was not territory, it was orientation. Even when a general won decisively, the question of legitimacy lingered. Power had to be defended continuously. This perpetual strain reshaped the political landscape. Kingdoms emerged that were strong but inward-looking. Culture flourished in some places, but it did so without the unifying ambition that had once driven Alexander's project. The world did not end, it fragmented into regions that learned to stand on their own. This fragmentation is often described as decline, but it can also be understood as exhaustion. The empire had run beyond the limits of a single guiding symbol. When that symbol vanished, the system could not sustain the same intensity. As night deepens and your breathing slows, imagine these wars not as clashes of steel, but as echoes. Each conflict repeating the form of Alexander's campaigns without their heart. The sound is familiar, but the meaning has drained away. This is what happens when power continues after belief has gone. Movement remains, but direction fades. And without direction, even victory feels incomplete. The death of Alexander the Great is often remembered as a political turning point, but its deeper significance lies elsewhere. It was a moment when belief lost its anchor. For years, the empire had not relied on institutions strong enough to survive their founder. It relied on a living center. Alexander was not merely a king, he was a point of orientation. His presence answered questions before they needed to be asked. Why fight? Why obey? Why endure? When that presence disappeared,
The answers did not immediately vanish, but they lost their clarity. The empire continued to function, but it no longer knew why it existed as one. This is why the image of a sacred flame is so fitting. As long as the fire burns, people gather around it. They know where the center is. They feel warmth, direction, and reassurance. When the fire goes out, the space does not instantly collapse. People remain, structures stand, but orientation is gone. Individuals begin to drift toward smaller lights, toward what feels closest and safest. The death of Alexander created exactly this condition. His empire did not fall because enemies struck it down. It fell because the shared belief that once held it together could not be transferred. Alexander's successors inherited armies, cities, and wealth. They did not inherit conviction. They tried to recreate it through ceremony, imagery, and force, but belief cannot be commanded, it must be shared. Without a single figure or story to unify it, the empire fragmented into realms that reflected local needs rather than universal purpose. This pattern appears again and again throughout history. Systems built around a single, irreplaceable center may rise quickly, but they are fragile by nature. Their strength lies in unity of meaning, but that same unity resists succession. When the center vanishes, there is no gradual handover, there is only absence. Alexander's death teaches us that power is not sustained by control alone. It is sustained by trust, narrative, and shared orientation. When those elements disappear, even the most formidable structures lose coherence. As you drift toward sleep, allow this lesson to settle gently. Consider how often stability in your own world depends not on rules or force, but on quiet agreement about what matters. When that agreement holds, systems feel natural. When it breaks, confusion spreads, even if everything still looks intact. Alexander's empire was one of the greatest achievements of the ancient world, but its end reminds us of something deeply human. We follow not only strength, but meaning. We endure not only because we must, but because we believe we are moving towards something together. When that shared direction fades, motion continues, but purpose dissolves. The world grows tired. And so, in the stillness of the night, imagine the empire after Alexander, not as a tragedy of loss, but as a lesson written softly into history. A reminder that the most powerful force binding societies is not conquest, but the shared flame of belief. When that flame is tended, worlds expand. When it goes out, even empires learn how to sleep.
Far from the marble cities and straight roads of empire, beyond the places where history was carved into stone, there were mountains that did not speak the language of conquest. In these regions, often labeled simply as Illyrian by Greek and Roman writers, power did not announce itself with banners or armies. It moved quietly, carried by memory, voice, and ritual. Among these communities, priestesses held a form of authority that left few traces for historians, yet shaped everyday life in ways both intimate and enduring. They did not rule territory, they tended continuity. These women stood at thresholds between illness and healing, between fear and reassurance, between the living and the unseen forces believed to shape fate. Their power did not come from law or lineage, but from trust built slowly over generations. In a world without centralized states, stability depended on shared belief. The priestess was the keeper of that belief. She remembered what the community had agreed to forget and repeated what needed to be remembered again. Outsiders often misunderstood this role. Ancient sources describe Illyrian lands as wild, unstable, or peripheral. What they missed was the subtle structure holding those societies together. Ritual replaced bureaucracy. Oral tradition replaced written decree. The priestess's voice carried authority not because it commanded, but because it aligned people with rhythms they recognized as older than themselves. Healing rituals addressed more than the body. They restored confidence, belonging, and a sense of order after disruption. Prophetic practices did not predict the future so much as help communities make sense of uncertainty. In this way, priestesses provided orientation, much like the sacred flame of Rome or the living presence of Alexander once had. But here, the center was not singular or monumental. It was portable. It moved from gathering to gathering, from voice to voice. This made it resilient. When empires rose and fell nearby, these traditions adapted quietly. They did not need to defend borders. They needed only to be remembered. As you listen and let your breathing slow, imagine a mountain settlement at dusk. No proclamations are issued, no armies pass through. Yet people gather, attentive, calm. They listen not because they are ordered to, but because listening keeps the world intelligible. This is power at the edge of history, not loud enough to dominate records, but steady enough to endure.
In Illyrian communities, healing was never separated from meaning. Illness was not understood only as a failure of the body, but as a disturbance in balance between person and land, between individual and group, between the visible and the unseen. The priestess entered this space not as a ruler, but as a guide. She did not diagnose in the modern sense. She listened. She observed rhythms that others had learned to ignore: breathing, posture, silence, fear. Her rituals were slow, deliberate, and repetitive. Words mattered, but so did pauses. Gestures were small, almost understated, yet they carried weight because they had been performed in the same way for generations. Without written texts, consistency depended on memory. Songs, chants, and movements encoded knowledge more reliably than parchment ever could. Each repetition reinforced not only technique, but belonging. To be healed was also to be reminded that one was still part of the whole. Oral tradition allowed adaptation without fracture. When circumstances changed, rituals shifted subtly, absorbing new experiences while preserving familiar forms. This flexibility gave Illyrian spiritual life remarkable resilience. Empires rely on records to persist. These communities relied on recall. When an elder died, knowledge did not vanish. It had already been distributed across voices, gestures, and shared practices. Children learned by watching long before they understood meaning. Over time, understanding arrived naturally. Prophecy followed a similar pattern. It was not a declaration of fixed futures, but a communal process of interpretation. Signs were discussed, not imposed. The priestess framed uncertainty in ways the group could live with. In doing so, she reduced fear. Fear unmanaged becomes violence or paralysis. Fear acknowledged becomes caution, patience, preparation. This was the true healing work. It stabilized emotions as much as bodies. As night deepens, imagine a circle formed by firelight. No one writes anything down. No one needs to. Memory moves from breath to breath, from voice to listening ear. In this quiet exchange, history survives, not as dates, but as lived continuity. When empires collapse, they leave behind silence where commands once echoed. Roads still exist, stones still stand, but the voice that told people what those structures meant disappears.
At the edges of the ancient world, this collapse felt different. Communities that had never depended on a distant center did not experience sudden disorientation. In Illyrian regions, life continued through patterns already practiced for generations. The priestess played a crucial role in this continuity. She did not represent a throne or a capital. She represented relationships between clans, between seasons, between memory and present need. When conflicts arose between neighboring groups, resolution often passed through ritual rather than decree. Shared ceremonies created neutral ground where grievances could be acknowledged without escalating into violence. The priestess guided these moments, not as an enforcer, but as a mediator whose authority rested on collective trust. This trust was built because her role was consistent across time. While leaders changed and alliances shifted, ritual endured. It provided a stable rhythm that outlasted political events. As a result, when larger powers rose and fell nearby, these communities absorbed the shock without losing coherence. Their identity did not depend on imperial narratives. It lived in songs, gestures, and seasonal gatherings. This is why peripheral traditions often out-centralized ones. They are less visible, but more flexible. When writing disappears, memory adapts. When law weakens, custom holds. The priestess became a living archive, not of facts, but of meanings. She carried stories that explained why things were done, not just how. This distinction mattered. Empires record outcomes, communities preserve reasons. As night deepens, imagine a world where history is not stored in libraries, but in people, where survival depends on listening as much as acting. In such a world, collapse does not erase the past, it merely quiets it, allowing older voices to be heard again.
Power at the center of empires announces itself. It builds monuments, issues laws, and demands recognition. Its voice is loud by necessity because it must reach across distance and difference. But loud power carries a weakness. It depends on constant reinforcement. When armies withdraw, when rulers die, when symbols lose their audience, the sound fades. At the edges of the ancient world, power took another form. It did not need to project itself far. It lived close to daily life. In Illyrian traditions, the priestess embodied this quieter force. She did not command attention, she received it. People came to her not out of obligation, but because her presence made uncertainty manageable. This difference mattered deeply. Loud power organizes behavior through fear and reward. Quiet power organizes feeling. It steadies emotion, restores rhythm, and reassures the mind. That is why it endures when structures collapse. Empires can compel obedience, but they struggle to maintain meaning. Ritual does the opposite. It rarely compels, but it continuously renews meaning. A healing ceremony does not require belief enforced by law. It invites participation. Even skepticism can coexist with ritual, because the act itself provides comfort in structure. Over time, repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity creates trust. This trust does not vanish when political authority changes. It remains embedded in habit. The priestess's authority flowed from this habit. She was not above the community, she was woven into it. Her words mattered because they echoed what people already felt but could not articulate. When the world beyond the mountains changed, new rulers, new borders, new gods,
The internal rhythm of these communities adjusted slowly, without rupture. They absorbed external influences selectively, filtering them through existing ritual frameworks. This selective adaptation protected continuity. Loud power often seeks replacement. Quiet power seeks integration. This is why when empires fell, their records survived unevenly, but their rituals rarely did, unless they had been carried in people rather than imposed upon them. As night deepens and your thoughts soften, imagine the contrast. A city square once filled with proclamations now stands silent. Far away, a small gathering continues, unchanged. No announcement marks its importance, yet it persists. This is the power that history often overlooks, not because it is weak, but because it does not need to be seen to function. It waits, patient, until the noise passes.
When we look back across the long arc of history, patterns begin to emerge that are easy to miss when stories are told in isolation. The sacred fire of Rome, guarded by the Vestal Virgins, was never just a flame. It was a promise that order still held, that the world had not slipped into chaos overnight. Medieval games and sports were never merely entertainment. They were carefully bounded spaces where tension could be released without tearing the social fabric apart. The death of Alexander the Great was not only the loss of a king, but the extinguishing of a living center that gave meaning to an entire world. And at the edges of these great narratives, in places far from palaces and chronicles, Illyrian priestesses continued to practice rituals that asked for no empire at all, only attention, memory, and care. These stories seem different on the surface, yet they speak the same quiet truth. Human beings do not live by force alone. They live by reassurance. Ritual is how societies tell themselves that things are still in place. It is how fear is softened, how uncertainty is shaped into something bearable. When rituals function well, people sleep more easily, not because danger is gone, but because danger has been named, contained, and woven into meaning. Empires often believe they are held together by armies, laws, and wealth. History shows otherwise. Those structures matter, but they are secondary. What truly binds people is the shared agreement that the world still makes sense. Ritual provides that agreement without argument. It does not need to convince. It repeats, and in repetition, it calms. This is why when great centers fall, smaller traditions often survive. They do not depend on scale. They depend on continuity. A whispered chant can outlast a marble inscription. A remembered gesture can endure longer than a decree. As you lie listening, letting the day recede, notice how your own life still follows this ancient pattern. Evening routines, familiar sounds, repeated movements that signal safety. You may not call them rituals, but they serve the same purpose. They tell your mind that the world is ordered enough, at least for now, to rest. From Rome's eternal flame to the laughter of medieval fields, to the silence that followed Alexander's last breath, to the mountain gatherings where priestesses spoke softly into the dark, history reminds us of something simple and profound. Civilization is not only built, it is soothed into being. And when that soothing rhythm is lost, no amount of power can replace it. So tonight, as history fades gently into sleep, remember this thread that runs through time. We endure not because we conquer, but because we remember how to reassure ourselves together. Ritual is the quiet promise that tomorrow can come without fear. And in that promise, the world, for a while, can rest.